My best friend's family thought we were dating. They couldn't have been more right. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss a new upload. Every subscription helps us bring more touching, emotional, and unforgettable stories to life. Thank you for supporting our channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. Sometimes the whole world falls in love before the two people living the story ever notice. If someone had asked me a month ago whether I was dating my best friend, I would have laughed so hard I probably would have spilled my coffee all over the table. Noah Carter had been my best friend since freshman year of college. We had survived impossible group projects, tiny apartments with broken air conditioning, cross-country road trips that should have ended in disaster, and enough late-night pizza deliveries to keep a small restaurant in business. Somewhere along the way, our lives had become so intertwined that even my parents occasionally forgot to ask whether Noah was coming to Thanksgiving because they simply assumed he would be there. To me, that was what best friends did. They showed up. They stayed. They became family without anyone needing to say it out loud. So when Noah invited me to his parents' annual summer barbecue just outside Portland, I didn't think twice. I tossed an overnight bag into the back seat of my aging Honda Civic, picked up his favorite cinnamon coffee on the way, and drove the 2 hours while Noah controlled the playlist like he always did. He sang terribly on purpose just to make me laugh, drummed invisible sticks against the dashboard, and somehow remembered every embarrassing story I'd spent years trying to erase from existence. It felt comfortable, familiar, safe, exactly like every other weekend we'd shared over the past 8 years. The strange part didn't begin until we pulled into his parents' driveway. Before I had even unbuckled my seatbelt, Noah's younger sister Lily burst out the front door wearing a grin that looked far too confident. Finally, she shouted, "Mom said you'd be late because Ethan takes forever to choose an outfit whenever he visits his boyfriend's family." I froze with one hand still on the door handle. His what? Lily only laughed and disappeared back inside before I could ask another question. Noah rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly fascinated by the front lawn. "Ignore her," he mumbled. "She watches too many romantic movies." That explanation lasted exactly 15 seconds. The moment I stepped into the house, Noah's mom wrapped me in the kind of hug usually reserved for returning soldiers and immediately asked whether I still wanted lemon bars because she had made an extra batch just for you, sweetheart. His dad walked over from the kitchen carrying a tray of burgers and casually said, "Good. Now my two favorite guys are finally here." His grandmother reached across the dining table, squeezed my hand, and smiled with complete certainty. "You look wonderful together, as always." Together. The word landed softly, but it echoed somewhere I couldn't explain. Every family photo hanging along the hallway suddenly caught my attention. There I was beside Noah at Christmas, beside Noah at graduation, beside Noah at birthday parties, camping trips, weddings, and countless ordinary Sundays. I had always assumed I was standing there because I happened to be nearby when someone lifted a camera. Looking at those pictures now, it almost seemed like everyone else had been arranging us side by side long before either of us noticed. Then Noah's mother walked into the living room carrying a framed photo she'd just found upstairs. She smiled, handed it to me, and said with absolute confidence, "I've always loved this one. It's the first picture where you two looked like a real couple." The room filled with warm laughter. Everyone smiled. Everyone nodded. Everyone acted as though she'd simply stated the obvious. Everyone except me. I forced a laugh because that was what I always did whenever life became too awkward to process. "You all have an incredible imagination," I said, setting the framed picture back onto the coffee table. Noah's grandmother gave me a knowing smile over the rim of her iced tea. "Honey, imagination has nothing to do with it." More laughter drifted through the room, while Noah quietly rescued me by suggesting we take the cooler out to the backyard before the burgers got cold. I followed him through the kitchen, grateful for the escape, but the silence between us suddenly felt unfamiliar. We had never needed conversation before. Now every quiet second seemed to carry a question neither of us wanted to ask. Outside, the backyard looked exactly as I remembered it. The enormous maple tree still shaded half the lawn. The old wooden swing still creaked softly in the afternoon breeze. Noah's father was already arguing with his neighbor about the proper way to grill corn, while Lily chased the family dog across the grass pretending she had any chance of catching him. Everything felt comfortably ordinary except for the strange weight pressing against my thoughts. I caught myself watching Noah without meaning to. He greeted relatives with the same calm smile he always wore. He carried folding chairs with effortless ease. He remembered everyone's favorite drink before they even asked. I had seen all of this hundreds of times before. Why did it suddenly look different? Earth to Ethan. Noah nudged my shoulder with a paper plate. You disappeared for a minute. I was just thinking. That sounds dangerous. Probably. He laughed, and the familiar sound loosened something tight inside my chest. Maybe I really was overthinking this. Families teased people all the time. Maybe his parents had simply decided years ago that pretending we were together was funny, and eventually everyone forgot it had started as a joke. That explanation lasted until dinner. Noah's mother placed our plates beside each other without asking where we wanted to sit. His father handed Noah the bottle of barbecue sauce and casually said, "Make sure Ethan gets some first. You always remember." Noah did exactly that without hesitation. Then Lily leaned across the picnic table with the kind of mischievous grin that usually meant trouble. "Remember when Noah drove 3 hours during that snowstorm because Ethan said he had the flu?" I blinked. "That was years ago." "Exactly," she replied. "Most friends send a text message. My brother showed up with soup, medicine, groceries, and stayed for the whole weekend." Noah shrugged as though it had been nothing. "You were sick. You canceled your skiing trip," Lily reminded him. "With tickets you could not even refund." He took another bite of his burger, refusing to look at anyone. "Plans change." His mother smiled softly. "They always seem to change whenever Ethan needed something." I opened my mouth to argue, but another memory surfaced before I could speak. The flat tire outside Sacramento. Noah leaving work early to drive nearly 200 miles just because I sounded frustrated on the phone. The apartment flood where he spent an entire Saturday helping me save furniture instead of attending a concert he had been excited about for months. The promotion dinner he skipped because my grandmother had been admitted to the hospital and I did not want to sit alone in the waiting room. I had thanked him every single time. He had always answered with the exact same sentence. "That is what best friends do." Sitting beneath the maple tree with the evening sun slipping lower across the yard, I repeated those words silently to myself. For the first time in 8 years, they no longer sounded as simple as they once had. That night, after everyone else drifted toward desserts and backyard games, I escaped into the kitchen under the excuse of looking for more iced tea. The house felt quieter inside, wrapped in the familiar sounds of laughter filtering through the screen door. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at Noah tossing a football with his little cousins. He looked relaxed, smiling in that effortless way that somehow made everyone around him smile too. I shook my head at myself. I was reading too much into an ordinary afternoon. "You know," a gentle voice said behind me. "I was beginning to wonder how long it would take before you came in here to think." I turned to find Noah's mother carrying a fresh pie toward the dining room table. She smiled with the calm confidence of someone who had already figured out the ending to a story everyone else was still reading. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Only to someone who has known you for 8 years. I laughed softly. "Your family really enjoys teasing me." She set the pie down and looked at me with surprising tenderness. "Ethan, sweetheart, nobody is teasing you." The room suddenly felt much quieter. I searched her face for the playful grin I expected, but it never came. She folded a dish towel over the back of a chair and continued in the same gentle voice. "We stopped joking about it years ago because, honestly, we all assumed you two had simply decided to keep your relationship private." I blinked several times. "Relationship?" She nodded as though she had just confirmed the weather. "Every holiday, every birthday, every family emergency, every celebration, you were there. Noah never introduced anyone else. He only ever talked about you." I let out a nervous laugh. "That is because we are best friends." "Yes," she agreed softly. "You are." She paused for a moment before adding, "But Noah has loved you for a very long time." Time stopped. Not dramatically. Not with thunder or music or some impossible revelation. It simply stopped. My thoughts froze halfway through forming. My heartbeat suddenly seemed much louder than the voices outside. "I think you have the wrong idea," I finally managed. "Noah never." She smiled sadly. "He never told you." It was not a question. It was quiet certainty. I could not answer because I genuinely did not know how. She walked over and rested one hand lightly against my shoulder. "He asked us years ago not to say anything. He did not want anyone making you uncomfortable. He said if friendship was all you could ever give him, then friendship would always be enough. My chest tightened in a way I had never experienced before. How many years? I whispered. She looked toward the backyard where Noah had just picked up his youngest cousin after pretending to lose another football game. Her eyes softened. Long enough that I honestly cannot remember when it started. I stared through the kitchen window. Noah laughed as his cousins piled onto his back. Lily stole his baseball cap and ran across the yard while he chased after her with exaggerated determination, making everyone laugh even harder. He looked exactly like the Noah I had always known. Patient, kind, reliable, safe. Yet somehow he also looked like someone I had never truly seen before. The most astonishing part was not discovering that Noah had been quietly carrying feelings all these years. It was realizing that every single person in this house had known the truth except me. The drive back to Portland the next morning felt strangely unfamiliar, even though Noah and I had made the trip dozens of times before. The same highway stretched ahead of us. The same pine trees blurred past the windows. The same playlist drifted softly through the speakers. Yet everything around me seemed slightly out of focus, as though someone had quietly adjusted the lens through which I had always seen my life. Noah chatted about work, complained about the construction near his office, laughed about Lily secretly slipping extra cookies into my overnight bag, and pointed out a roadside diner he wanted us to try someday. I answered when he spoke, smiled when he joked, and even laughed in the right places. But beneath every ordinary moment, a single thought refused to leave me alone. He has loved you for years. Every glance toward him became dangerous. When he reached across the center console to hand me a bottle of water, I remembered all the countless times he had quietly noticed I was thirsty before I ever said a word. When he lowered the air conditioning because he knew I always got cold during long drives, I caught myself wondering how many tiny habits of mine he had memorized without me ever noticing. They had once felt like simple acts of friendship. Now every gesture carried an entirely different weight, and I did not know what to do with it. By the time we reached my apartment building, I was exhausted from thinking. Noah carried my overnight bag upstairs before I could protest, exactly as he always did. He set it beside my couch, smiled, and asked, "Same dinner next Friday?" It was our tradition. Every Friday evening, we ordered takeout, watched terrible movies, and argued about which one of us had worse taste. I opened my mouth to answer automatically, but the words caught somewhere inside me. Actually, work has been getting pretty busy lately. The lie tasted unfamiliar. Noah nodded without hesitation. No problem. Maybe the week after. Maybe. He smiled anyway. Get some rest. Then he left. The apartment became painfully quiet the moment the door clicked shut. I stood in the middle of my living room listening to the silence expand into every corner. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Noah had sent a picture of the cookies Lily packed for me with the message, "She said I was under strict orders to make sure you actually eat them." I stared at the screen much longer than necessary before typing back a simple thank you. Over the next several days, I found excuses where I had never needed them before. I answered his messages hours later instead of immediately. I claimed unexpected deadlines when he invited me to lunch. I skipped our usual Sunday morning coffee because I suddenly needed to catch up on laundry. Every excuse sounded believable. Every excuse felt terrible. The strangest part was that Noah never complained. He never questioned the growing distance. He simply answered every short message with the same patience he had always shown me. "Hope your meeting goes well. Drive safely. Do not forget your umbrella. Sleep early tonight." His kindness somehow made the guilt even heavier. On Wednesday afternoon, I walked into my favorite neighborhood coffee shop out of habit, ordered the same vanilla latte I had been buying for years, and instinctively turned toward the corner table by the window. It sat empty. That was when I realized something embarrassingly simple. I had never actually loved that table. I had loved the person who was almost always sitting across from me. By Friday afternoon, I had almost convinced myself that creating a little distance had been the right decision. Maybe if I gave both of us enough space, everything would quietly return to normal. Maybe Noah would eventually move on. Maybe I would stop hearing his mother's words every time my phone lit up with his name. Life had a funny habit of ignoring every carefully constructed plan. I left work a little earlier than usual, balancing my laptop bag over one shoulder while carrying a cardboard tray with 2 iced coffees. The second one had been purchased out of pure habit before I remembered there was no Friday movie night waiting for me anymore. I laughed softly at myself, shook my head, and turned toward the parking garage. Portland's sky had settled into its usual gray blanket, and a light drizzle painted the pavement with a silver sheen. I had barely reached the crosswalk when my phone slipped from my hand. It bounced once, skidded farther than I expected, and came to rest near the curb. Seriously? I muttered. I hurried after it, reached down too quickly, and my foot landed on the rain-slick paint instead of the sidewalk. My balance disappeared for half a heartbeat. The coffees tipped forward. I stumbled awkwardly onto one knee, catching myself with one hand before I could fall any farther. It was not dramatic. It was not even particularly painful. Mostly embarrassing. One coffee surrendered immediately, splashing harmlessly across the wet pavement, while the other somehow survived with remarkable determination. "Are you okay?" A woman walking her dog slowed beside me. "I am fine," I answered with an embarrassed smile. "Just wounded pride." She laughed, helped me retrieve my phone, and continued down the block. I brushed the rain from my jeans, flexed my wrist once, and decided everything seemed perfectly functional. My phone, however, had other ideas. The screen had somehow unlocked during my acrobatic performance and dialed the last person I had called. Noah. Before I could hang up, his voice burst through the speaker. "Ethan." I froze. "I am okay." "Why are you breathing like that?" "Because I just made friends with the sidewalk." There was a pause that lasted less than a second. "Where are you?" "Noah, seriously, it is nothing." "Where are you?" His voice remained calm, but something underneath it had changed. I sighed and gave him the intersection, expecting him to tell me to be careful before returning to whatever meeting he was probably attending. Instead, he simply said, "Stay there." The call ended. Exactly 12 minutes later, a dark blue pickup truck pulled against the curb. Noah climbed out before the engine had fully settled. His tie was loosened, one sleeve was rolled unevenly to his elbow, and his hair looked as though he had spent the drive running both hands through it. He crossed the sidewalk with long, hurried steps, stopping directly in front of me. "Let me see your hand." I blinked. "Hello to you too." "Ethan." I held out my palm. There was a tiny scrape near the base of my thumb, barely larger than a postage stamp. Noah examined it as though it deserved the attention of a medical team. Then he looked at my knee, then my wrist, then my face. His shoulders finally lowered after a long, quiet breath. "You scared me." He did not say it dramatically. He did not even seem to realize he had spoken out loud. Those 3 words landed with more weight than any grand declaration ever could. Standing there beneath the gentle rain, watching relief slowly replace fear in his eyes, I realized I had never actually seen Noah afraid before. And somehow, the thing that frightened him most had been the possibility that something small might have happened to me. Noah insisted on driving me home even after I reminded him 3 separate times that I was perfectly capable of operating a car with one tiny scrape on my hand. He ignored every protest with the quiet determination I had always admired about him. The rain continued tapping softly against the windshield while the city drifted past in muted shades of gray. Neither of us spoke very much. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt full, as though both of us were carrying thoughts too heavy for ordinary conversation. When we reached my apartment building, I expected him to drop me off with his usual smile and a reminder to clean the scrape before disappearing into another busy evening. Instead, he parked the truck, turned off the engine, and stayed exactly where he was. The quiet settled around us once again. I looked down at the bandage he had insisted on buying from a nearby pharmacy, covering an injury that barely qualified as a scratch. I smiled despite myself. "You know that was completely unnecessary, right?" Noah stared through the windshield for several long seconds before answering. "I know." His voice sounded softer than usual. "I just needed to make sure you were really okay." I finally turned toward him. The calm expression he always wore had slipped just enough for me to see the exhaustion underneath it. Not physical exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying something for a very long time. "Your mom told me," I said quietly. His hands tightened around the steering wheel without moving. He did not ask what she had told me. He already knew. Another long silence passed before he let out a slow breath. I asked her not to. She did not mean to hurt anyone. "I know." He nodded once. "She probably thought you deserved to know." I swallowed carefully. "Did you really?" The question dissolved before reaching the end. Noah finished it for me with a faint, almost amused smile that never reached his eyes. Love you. Hearing the words spoken aloud made my heart stumble in a way I could not explain. He looked out at the rain instead of at me. Since we were about 19, I think. Maybe earlier. I stopped trying to figure out exactly when because it did not really matter anymore. I searched his face for regret, but found only honesty. Calm, gentle, almost peaceful acceptance. Why did you never tell me? He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Because I know you. That answer somehow hurt more than I expected. You value loyalty more than almost anything else. If I had told you back then, you would have felt responsible for my feelings. You would have worried about saying the wrong thing. You would have started apologizing for things that were never your fault. He smiled warmly, finally meeting my eyes. I never wanted our friendship to become something you had to carry. I could not find a single word to interrupt him. You have given me 8 incredible years, Ethan. More road trips than I can count. Holidays with my family. Terrible movies every Friday. Phone calls at 2 in the morning when one of us could not sleep. You have already given me more happiness than I ever expected. His smile grew smaller, but somehow even more sincere. If friendship was all I was ever going to have, then I decided a long time ago that it would be enough. The rain blurred the city lights beyond the windshield until everything outside looked soft and distant. Inside the truck, every memory we had ever shared suddenly rearranged itself into a picture I had somehow never recognized. Noah had never asked for anything, never expected anything. He had simply chosen, year after year, to love me quietly while making sure I never felt the weight of it. And sitting beside him in the fading evening light, I realized the person who had been carrying the greatest secret all this time had also been the one protecting my heart the most. After Noah left, I stayed in my apartment with the lights off long after the rain had stopped. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It echoed. Every room seemed to hold another memory I had carelessly labeled as friendship without ever asking whether there had been something deeper hiding underneath it. I wandered into the kitchen and automatically reached for 2 mugs before realizing there was only one person there. I laughed quietly at myself, set the second mug back into the cabinet, and leaned against the counter. How many habits had become ours instead of mine? My phone buzzed once. It was Noah. Please clean the scrape again before bed. Good night. Nothing more. No pressure. No expectations. Just the same quiet kindness that had followed me through nearly a decade of my life. I stared at the message until the screen faded to black. Sleep never really came that night. Instead, memories arrived one after another, almost like old photographs someone had scattered across the floor for me to examine with fresh eyes. I remembered my first apartment after college when the heater failed in the middle of January. Noah had shown up carrying extra blankets and a space heater because he knew I would insist on waiting until payday to fix it. I remembered the afternoon my father underwent surgery. I had told everyone not to leave work because there was nothing they could do anyway. Noah had quietly appeared beside me in the hospital waiting room, carrying 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. We had barely spoken for 4 hours. He had simply stayed. I remembered my 25th birthday when everyone else canceled because of a sudden snowstorm. Noah arrived anyway with a lopsided homemade cake that leaned so dramatically to one side, it looked like it might surrender to gravity at any moment. We laughed until our stomachs hurt while eating slices that somehow tasted better than any bakery could have managed. At the time, I had called him the best friend anyone could ever ask for. Now I wondered whether I had been describing something much greater without realizing it. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine spilling through my apartment windows, the kind of clear Oregon morning that always made the city feel newly washed. I decided I needed fresh air more than another hour alone with my thoughts. I walked through the neighborhood park where Noah and I had thrown frisbees, shared takeout, and wasted entire afternoons talking about absolutely nothing. The familiar bench near the duck pond was empty. I sat down anyway. An older couple occupied the bench across the path. They shared a newspaper, occasionally nudging each other whenever one discovered an interesting article. Neither of them spoke very much. They did not need to. Years of quiet understanding rested comfortably between them. I watched them for several minutes before a surprising thought slipped into my mind. I had always imagined falling in love would feel dramatic. Fireworks, sudden certainty, a life-changing moment impossible to miss. Instead, what if love looked exactly like 8 years of showing up? 8 years of remembered coffee orders, late-night phone calls, borrowed house keys, shared holidays, inside jokes, and ordinary Tuesdays that slowly became the foundation of an entire life. My heartbeat quickened as one impossible realization settled gently into place. Noah had not changed. His feelings had not suddenly become larger. The only thing that had changed was me. I was finally seeing him clearly, and the person standing at the center of every happy memory I owned had never simply been my best friend. Somehow, without ever noticing when it happened, he had quietly become the place my heart always returned to. The following Friday arrived with surprising clarity. Instead of inventing another excuse, I found myself driving toward Noah's parents' house with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. My stomach fluttered the entire 2-hour trip, and I laughed at the irony. I had visited this house dozens of times without thinking twice. Somehow walking through the same front door now felt like stepping into an entirely different chapter of my life. The backyard was already alive with familiar voices, the smell of burgers on the grill, and Lily unsuccessfully trying to convince everyone that her homemade lemonade recipe deserved a trophy. Noah stood beside his father adjusting the patio lights, completely unaware that I had arrived. He looked over when he heard my footsteps, and genuine surprise crossed his face before settling into the warm smile I had missed far more than I wanted to admit. "I thought you had plans today," he said. "I changed them." His smile widened just a little. "I am glad." For the first hour, everything unfolded exactly as it always had. We carried folding chairs together. We helped Noah's grandmother arrange desserts on the picnic table. We laughed when the family dog stole a hot dog and proudly sprinted around the yard as though he had accomplished something heroic. Every ordinary moment felt strangely precious now that I finally understood how many years Noah had quietly treasured them. As the evening settled into soft golden light, everyone gathered for a group photo near the old maple tree. Noah automatically stepped to one side so I could stand beside him, the same unconscious movement we had repeated for years. The photographer adjusted the camera and called for everyone to move a little closer together. Without thinking, my hand reached for Noah's. Our fingers met naturally, almost as though they already knew where they belonged. Noah looked down in visible surprise before slowly lifting his eyes to mine. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. The photographer laughed. "There we go. That looks much better." Before the camera flashed, Lily suddenly clapped both hands together with dramatic excitement. "Finally," she shouted. "Do you know how exhausting it has been pretending not to notice?" The entire backyard erupted into laughter. Noah buried his face in one hand while shaking his head. "Lily, what?" she asked innocently. "I have been waiting years." Noah's father chuckled while flipping another burger. "Your sister started a family betting pool 3 summers ago." "Dad," Noah groaned. His grandmother looked completely unbothered as she took another sip of iced tea. "I guess this summer I win." Even Noah's mother simply smiled, folded her arms, and looked at us with unmistakable affection. "I was beginning to think the two of you planned on making us wait forever." I could not stop laughing. The nervousness that had followed me all week dissolved into something unexpectedly light. Nobody looked shocked. Nobody seemed confused. The only expressions surrounding us were relief, amusement, and quiet happiness. I turned toward Noah again. His cheeks carried the faintest hint of color, but his eyes held the same gentle warmth they always had whenever he looked at me. This time, however, I did not look away. I gave his hand a small, reassuring squeeze, and after one brief moment of disbelief, his fingers closed around mine with quiet certainty. The camera shutter clicked several times, capturing another family photograph. The difference was that, for the very first time, I understood exactly why everyone had always insisted that I belonged in the space beside him. 1 year later, the walls of our little craftsman house still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedarwood. Half the moving boxes had finally disappeared, although Noah insisted there was one labeled miscellaneous cables that would probably survive until retirement. I laughed every time he said it because he was almost certainly right. Saturday mornings had quietly become my favorite part of the week. Noah brewed coffee while humming songs he never remembered correctly. I made pancakes that were never perfectly round, and we argued about whether houseplants counted as family members. Ordinary moments had never felt so extraordinary. That afternoon, we decided to organize the last shelf in the hallway closet. It was mostly forgotten photo albums, old greeting cards, and dusty storage boxes that neither of us had opened in years. Noah disappeared into the garage looking for extra shelves while I settled onto the living room floor with the oldest album balanced across my knees. The first page held a college orientation picture. There we were, standing shoulder to shoulder with backpacks that looked far too large and haircuts we both regretted. I smiled. The next page showed a camping trip during sophomore year. Again, Noah beside me. Christmas at his parents' house. Beside me. Graduation. Beside me. His cousin's wedding. Beside me. My birthday dinner. Beside me. 4th of July. Thanksgiving. Random Sunday barbecues. Charity runs. Pumpkin patches. Beach vacations. Every chapter of my adult life unfolded one photograph at a time, and in every single one, Noah stood close enough that our shoulders almost always touched. "What are you smiling at?" he asked from the hallway. I looked up to find him carrying a wooden shelf over one shoulder. Instead of answering, I held up the album. He set the shelf against the wall, walked over, and sat beside me on the hardwood floor. We turned the pages together in comfortable silence. Occasionally he laughed at an old hairstyle or reminded me of some ridiculous story I had completely forgotten. Then we reached the family photograph from the barbecue 1 year earlier. The very first picture where I had reached for his hand without hesitation. Noah smiled quietly as his thumb brushed the edge of the photograph. "I remember thinking I was dreaming," he admitted. "I kept waiting to wake up." I rested my head lightly against his shoulder. "I spent years thinking everyone else was imagining things." He chuckled softly. Apparently, we were the only two people who needed convincing. Just then the front door opened without warning. Lily walked inside carrying 2 grocery bags and immediately spotted the photo album spread across the floor. "Please tell me you finally found the evidence," she announced dramatically. "I have been saying since college that you two were basically married." She dropped the grocery bags onto the kitchen counter before pulling out her phone. "Hold still. I need a picture of you looking at pictures of yourselves, because Mom will absolutely cry." Noah sighed with exaggerated defeat, while I laughed so hard my eyes watered. A camera clicked. Then another. Somewhere in the background, Lily proudly declared that she was updating the family group chat with the caption, "They finally caught up." Watching her disappear into the kitchen, I realized she was probably right. Love had not arrived suddenly like a lightning strike. It had been quietly growing inside ordinary days, hidden inside shared routines, patient conversations, long drives, remembered coffee orders, and countless moments that had seemed too small to matter until they became everything. Looking back through all those photographs, I finally understood the truth that everyone else had recognized long before I ever did. Home had never been a house, a city, or even a destination. Home had always been the person standing beside me in every picture, waiting with endless patience until I was finally ready to see what had been there all along.